In the quiet village of Zamari, mornings always arrived gently. The sun did not burst into the sky. It rose slowly, brushing the red earth with soft gold light. Smoke curled lazily from clay stoves, and roosters announced the beginning of another ordinary day, and every morning, before most children were awake, Saudi was already sitting outside, 12 years old. Slim, bright-eyed, thoughtful, she would sit on the low mud step outside her family's compound, her small notebook resting on her knees, writing words she had learned in school the day before. Saudi loved school, not because she wanted praise. Not because she wanted to compete, she loved it because it made her feel bigger than the village. Her teacher once asked, "What do you want to become when you grow up?" Some children laughed. Some shrugged. Saudi stood up slowly, her braids resting against her shoulders. "I want to become a doctor," she said, not loudly, but clearly. Her teacher paused for a moment, studying her face. "And why a doctor?" he asked gently. "So children will not die from small sickness," she replied. The classroom went quiet. It was not a child's answer, it was a dream. After school, Saudi became like every other 12-year-old. She ran barefoot through dormitories' dusty paths with her friends. They played hide and seek behind mud walls. They laughed so hard their stomachs hurt. They sat under neem trees sharing roasted groundnuts and secrets. Sometimes they lay on their backs watching clouds drift slowly above. Those were the hours that felt endless. At home, life felt steady. Bakila moved quietly through the compound, cooking, washing, teaching. She had gentle hands but strong eyes. "Measure the rice with care," she would say softly. "Small things matter." Saudi always listened carefully. She wanted to make her mother proud. Her father, Marik, was different. He was a man of discipline and routine. In the mornings, he worked his fields of millet and guinea corn beyond the village edge. By afternoon, he sold shoida and colorful wrappers in the market, greeting customers with confidence. He was respected, he was known. Every evening, as the sun dipped low, Marik returned home. Soon after, his friends Corinne and Tolam arrived. They would sit together in the courtyard, eating rice from a shared bowl. Laughter rose into the warm evening air. Stories of market prices, harvest, and village matters flowed easily between them. From the doorway, Saudi would watch. To her, that laughter meant safety, that routine meant stability, that house meant home. And at night, when moonlight spilled gently across dormitory, Saudi would sit with her notebook again. She liked writing her name, Dr. Saudi. She would smile to herself. She believed time was patient. She believed childhood lasted long. She did not notice how sometimes, during dinner, the laughter between Marik, Corinne, and Tolam paused just a little too long. She did not understand why her mother's eyes sometimes lingered on her with a sadness that did not match the peaceful evening. She was 12. She was innocent, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of that small village, something had already begun to shift, softly, silently, without her knowing. She was 12, she was innocent, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of that small village, something had already begun to shift, softly, silently, without her knowing. What Saudi did not know was that before the next moon rose over Zamari, someone would speak her name in a way that would change everything. The next day at their usual dinner mat, the men were seated together. They were eating and drinking as they talked about the affairs of the village, and the laughter slowly began to thin. The rice bowl passed from hand to hand. Smoke from the lantern curled upward into the dark sky. Corinne cleared his throat, wiped his hands carefully, and sat straighter. Marik noticed and sat up straight, and Tolam grew quiet. From the doorway, Saudi watched, her notebook resting on her knees. Corinne cleared his throat. "Marik," he began, his voice steady, "I have come with intention." Bakila's movement slowed inside the kitchen space. Corinne did not hesitate. He said firmly, "I want to marry your daughter." "Saudi." The words did not shout. They settled into the cold dark night. Inside the doorway, Saudi stopped breathing. "What?" "Mary." Marik's face hardened slightly. "She is 12. "I know," Corinne replied calmly. "I am 50. I am not a careless young man." 50. Saudi's fingers tightened around her notebook. Corinne continued casually, "You know my household. I have 3 wives. 14 children. My compound is established. I am among the wealthiest men in Zamari." He said further, "If she comes to me, she will be wife number 4. Bakila stepped forward. "She is still in school." Corinne nodded once and said she must stop. "There is no need for school now. My wives will teach her what she needs to know. I will wait before children come. I am not in a hurry." He leaned back slightly, then added, "I will bring 10 bags of millet. 10 bags of rice. 5 cows. 5 goats. 2 baskets filled with gold coins. And 1 full bale of the finest materials from the city." The numbers filled the courtyard like drums: 5 cows. 5 goats, grain enough for months, gold, respect. Security, Tolam spoke softly. "This is our way. It has always been done in Zamari. Batlik, my second wife, is 14 years old and I married her 3 years ago." Tradition stood quietly beside the offer. Bakila's voice trembled. "She wants to become a doctor." Corinne gave a small smile. "Dreams are good for children. Marriage builds families." Marik said nothing, silent while cows were counted, silent while gold was imagined, silent while his daughter's future was being negotiated. From the doorway, Saudi felt as though she were shrinking, not into a bride, into a transaction. Corinne's final words were smooth. "She will be safe with me." Marik finally spoke. "We will give you our answer tomorrow." Saudi stepped back into the shadows, her notebook slipped from her hands. As she realized that in Zamari, tradition and wealth could take a childhood without ever raising a voice. What do you think Marik's answer will be in the face of such a situation? Torn between love for his beloved daughter, Saudi, his friendship with Corinne, and an age-long tradition of Zamari Village. Watch out for the next episode. The night of weighing, long after the mat was folded and the lantern dimmed, Marik remained seated outside. The courtyard was empty, but Corinne's voice still echoed: 10 bags of millet, 5 cows, gold, security. In Zamari, such an offer was not refused lightly. It was respect. It was alliance. It was protection. Inside the house, Bakila moved quietly. She did not ask what he was thinking. She already knew. Marik closed his eyes. He imagined Saudi walking into Corinne's compound, 3 wives watching her, 14 children studying her, a 12-year-old trying to become wife number 4. His chest tightened. He remembered the day she was born. So small. So fragile. He had held her and whispered that she would never know hunger. Was this not protection, or was it surrender? From inside the doorway, a faint rustle. Saudi stepped out, thinking everyone was asleep. She sat with her notebook under the moonlight. Marik watched without her knowing. She traced words slowly with her finger. She paused. She smiled softly at something she had understood. She looked like a child, but she also looked like something more, something growing, something that did not belong inside Corinne's compound. Marik stood but did not approach her. Instead, he walked to the far edge of the courtyard and looked up at the sky. In Zamari, tradition was older than any man, but love was older than tradition. He exhaled deeply. Tomorrow, the men would gather again. Tomorrow, he would speak, and whatever he said would change something. Behind him, Saudi's notebook slipped from her hands. She did not notice. She was dreaming with her eyes open. He walked towards Saudi quietly and stood behind her. She sensed him and looked up. "Baba," he knelt slowly beside her. "What are you reading?" he asked, though he already knew. "About the human body," she said gently. "About how the heart works." She leaned her head slightly against his arm. In that moment, the millet, the cows, the gold, they all felt smaller, but tradition still stood in the dark, waiting. Marik looked up at the sky. Tomorrow, he would speak, and when he did, he would not just answer Corinne, he would answer himself. Episode 3, The Morning Without Food. The mat was not spread that morning. Instead, wooden chairs were arranged in a half-circle in Marik's compound. No rice bowl. No shared plates. Only a clay pot filled with water resting in the middle. Beside it, small metal cups. The message was clear: this was not fellowship. This was decision-making. The men arrived one after another. Quiet greetings. No teasing. No smiles. Corinne came last. He did not sit immediately. He looked around the compound first, as if measuring it. Then he sat down. Marik poured water into the cups himself. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. No one drank at first, then Tolem cleared his throat. "We are here," he said softly. Corinne leaned back in his chair. "So," he said calmly, "we wait no longer." Inside the house, Saudi stood behind the curtain, barely breathing. Bakila stood beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder. Marik looked at the clay pot in the middle. Water. Clear. Simple. Unlike the decision in front of him, he lifted his head slowly. "I have thought about your offer," he began. Corinne nodded once. "You are a strong man. Your household lacks nothing." A slight smile touched Corinne's lips. "But my daughter." Marik paused. Inside, Saudi's fingers trembled. "She is still a child." The words landed softly, but they did not move. Silence swallowed the courtyard. Corinne's jaw tightened. "We do not gather like this for children's games," he said quietly. Marik's voice did not rise. "She will finish her schooling." A chair creaked as one of the men shifted. Water remained untouched in the clay pot. Corinne leaned forward. "You would choose books over alliance." Marik swallowed. "I choose her future." The sentence changed everything. Corinne stood slowly. "This village has its ways," he said, voice colder now. "Men who break them stand alone." Marik remained seated. "If standing alone keeps my daughter a child, then I will stand." Inside, Saudi's tears finally fell, not from fear, from knowing she had been chosen. Corinne looked at him for a long moment, then he turned and walked out of the compound. No one drank the water. The clay pot sat full, but something in Zamari had already cracked: a friendship, a tradition, or perhaps the silence that had ruled fathers for generations. When a man chooses his daughter over custom, does he break his village? Or does he begin to rebuild it? Watch out for Part 4. Episode 5, The Cost of Standing. By sunset, the village had already heard. News in Zamari did not travel by feet, it traveled by breath. At the well, women lowered their voices when Bakila approached. At the market, men paused their conversation when Marik passed. No one insulted him, they simply looked at him strangely, and sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. The next morning, Marik walked to the fields where he and Corinne usually shared labor during planting season. Corinne's workers were there, but Corinne was not. One of the younger men stepped forward awkwardly. "Baba," Corinne said. "This year you will farm your own side." No anger. No explanation, just separation. Marik nodded once. He said nothing, but he understood that the alliance had been withdrawn. That evening, Saudi walked to the stream with other girls. Their laughter used to include her, but today they ignored her. One girl looked at her and smirked. "So you are too big for marriage now?" Another giggled and asked, "Will books will cook and marry you?" Saudi felt heat rise to her face. She kept walking, but she did not answer, and their words pressed against her chest like stones. Back home, Bakila noticed her silence. "What happened?" she asked gently. Saudi shook her head and said, "I am fine." But she was not. That night, Marik counted the grain in storage. Not much left. He calculated quietly. If the harvest failed, there would be no shared reserve from Corinne's compound. He stared at the sacks for a long time. Had he been brave? Or had he been reckless? Outside, Tolem approached. He stood at the entrance but did not enter fully. "You have made your choice," Tolem said softly. "But the village watches." Marik met his eyes and said, "I know." Tolem added, "There will be a council meeting soon." Marik's chest tightened. "For what?" he asked. Tolem did not answer directly. When one man bends tradition, others begin to question. He paused before saying, that makes elders uncomfortable. And Tolam left. Inside the house, Saudi sat with her book open, but she was not reading. She was listening. For the first time since that morning, fear returned, not fear of marriage. Fear that she had become a burden. Later that night, she stepped outside quietly. She found her father sitting alone. "Baba," she said softly. He looked up. "If it becomes too hard, I can stop school." The words nearly broke him. He stood immediately. "Do not shrink yourself to make others comfortable," he said firmly. Her eyes filled again, but they are angry. He placed his hand on her head. "Let them be." He looked toward the dark horizon of Zamari. "The question is not whether they are angry." He paused. "The question is whether we are afraid." In the distance, a drum sounded, slow and heavy, a signal drum. Bakila stepped outside. "That is the elder's drum," she whispered to Marik. Marik's stomach churned. The council was not coming someday. It was coming tomorrow. Episode 7, The Name No One Says. When the drum called again the next morning, Marik did not hesitate. He walked to the palace knowing this would not be polite. The villagers looked at him with shock as he walked past them, but most of them ignored him. Inside, the elder sat and the chief did not waste time in asking Marik, "You refuse what has always been done. You refuse such an honor from one of the wealthiest homes in Zamari." "Yes," Marik replied. An elder's voice sharpened. "Do you think you are wiser than our fathers?" asked another elder. Marik looked around the hall, at the faces of all the men there. "You remember Walita, my first thought," he said quietly. The chief's face tightened slightly. Of course they remembered. She was called humble, beautiful and well brought up. She was married to a 56-year-old farmer. At the age of 12, she had bled during childbirth at 13, and the drums had sounded 5 years ago too. Not for the council meeting, but for her burial. Marik's voice did not rise. "You danced at her wedding." Silence. "You carried her coffin." An elder shifted in his chair. Another looked away. "She was strong," someone muttered weakly. "She was a child," Marik replied. The words were not loud, but they portrayed the pains of a father. The chief leaned forward and said, "You are not the first to lose a daughter in this village, and tragedy does not rewrite culture." Marik swallowed. "No," he said. "But it should teach us." Now the room was uncomfortable. "You all know that I married my wife when she was 13 years old, Marik continued. "She experienced 3 days of labor to give birth to Walita. After that she had VVF. She was leaking urine and you all whispered then and called her cursed. Some of you here suggested that I return her to her father and marry other wives. You told me to let her be," he said calmly. "But I did not. I sold everything I had, my lands, 3 big shops and my house to take her for corrective surgery at the Poberi VVF Specialist Center." He looked at them carefully and asked, "Would you have done the same?" No one answered. The chief said, "This village has survived because we hold our ways. And we bury our daughters quietly," Marik answered. That landed softly but in a powerful way. Corinne finally spoke. He said, "Many girls marry young and leave." "Yes," Marik agreed. "And yet some do not." He paused. and said to Corinne directly, "You ask why I refuse you. It is because I already gave one daughter to this culture and I will not give another." The hall went still, outside. Villagers gathered closer to the walls. Inside, something heavier than anger settled it. The chief spoke carefully. "Now, you bring emotion into governance." Marik shook his head slowly. "No. I bring consequence." Then there was a long, uncomfortable silence. An elder who had not spoken finally cleared his throat. "I lost a niece," he murmured. No one looked at him. But everyone heard what he said, and that was the crack. It was not rebellion, it was not shouting, it was recognition. The chief stood slowly and said, "This matter will be decided tomorrow." But his voice no longer carried certainty. As Marik stepped out, he did not feel victorious. He felt exposed. Back home, Saudi brought him water to drink and some food to eat. She sat beside her father and asked Baba, "What happened?" He said, "I reminded them of what we pretend not to see." Episode 8, Ashes. They did not remove her name quietly. They did it publicly. Saudi arrived at school the next day and found her books outside the classroom door. Her name had been scratched off the attendance board and the teacher looked at her sadly before saying that he was giving the instruction from above. Other children stared at her and one of girl whispered to her, "Your father has caused trouble." Saudi did not cry there. She picked up her books and walked home alone. By the time she reached the compound, smoke was rising, not cooking smoke from her mother's kitchen but thick black smoke. Their barn was burning, all their grain and harvest, and the flames swallowed it fast. Bakila and Marik were trying their best to put off the fire. They were already running up and down with buckets of water. Men stood at a distance. No one rushed forward to help and no one asked questions. Everyone understood that this was not an accident, it was a warning to Marik. Marik stood still as the roof collapsed inward. In that moment, it was not just grain that burned, it was the message that was being silently passed: obey or lose more. That night the compound felt empty, no food stored and no school for Saudi to return to. Saudi said to her father, "I will marry him, let it stop." Marik turned sharply and said to her, "Never." "But Baba, look what they did." He looked at the ashes. "I buried one daughter because I obeyed quietly," he said. "I will not bury another because I was afraid." Outside, someone left a small calabash of grain at their gate. The barn was burnt to ashes and the air still smelled of smoke. Marik remained outside long after darkness settled. He did not move and he just stared at what was gone. Sometime in the night, he heard soft footsteps of someone approaching but he did not turn to see who it was. By morning, there was a small sack of millet at their doorstep, with no note and no name. Bakila picked it up slowly and asked who brought this. Before they could answer, another woman passed by. She did not stop, she simply placed her own bag beside the first one without saying a word. Still no words, then another. And another. By mid-morning, Marik stepped fully outside the house and he was surprised. The small sacks had grown. Not one, not two, but a huge pile, grain stacked carefully against their wall. There was millet, rice and maize, more than one family could have given alone. Across the path, women stood watching. An old woman nodded once towards their house. This was not rebellion but this was recognition that he is not alone. Saudi looked at the growing pile. "Baba," she whispered. Marik's throat tightened. As he said, "They burned our barn, but they could not burn memory." Across Zamari, something had shifted, not loudly, but permanently. Episode 9, The Split. The pile of grain did not quiet the village. It stirred new quarrels because by afternoon, people's voices rose in the market. Not whispers but serious arguments. One man shouted, "You burned his barn," another man replied sharply. No one saw anything. A woman stepped forward and said, "We all saw the smoke rising and all his food burnt. And we all saw the grains too," someone added. The market divided into circles. Some stood behind Marik openly supporting while others were against him. One elder argued loudly. He challenged tradition, and what did he expect in return? "So, is that enough reason to burn his food?" A younger man shot back. Is that our way? The voices grew louder and louder, then a man pushed forward from the crowd. His voice was not loud, but his face was tired. My daughter has been returned to my house by her husband because she has VVF, she leaks urine, he said. And everyone became silent, no one laughed and no one moved. She was married at 13 and she got pregnant immediately. He continued, she was in labor for 4 days and the baby died but she survived, but her husband sent her back. His voice shook as he said, she sits in my house and does not leave the room. She wanted to be a nurse and she was the best in her class. The air grew heavy, but before anyone could respond, he added quietly, I buried my second daughter 3 months ago. She took poison because she didn't want to marry Fahad the farmer. No argument followed that, but even the men who had been defending tradition lowered their eyes. The chief had arrived by then and he had had enough. He said firmly and angrily, this fire is not the way of Zamari. This matter has gone beyond pride, he added, it has now reached graves. The crowd was no longer divided by volume, but was divided by memory. Some still stood stiff with resistance, but others were visibly shaken. Episode 10, The Breaking Point. The next morning, Zamari gathered without being called, the square before the palace field. But this time, the mother stood in front, not behind the men. One woman stepped forward first. My daughter was married at 15, she said. She labored for 3 days. The baby lived. She did not. Another woman said, I was 13 when I married. They said pain was normal. They said endurance was virtue. Her voice was shaking as she added, but pain is not virtue. An older woman added, they called my niece cursed when she leaked. They told her husband to return her and she has not stepped outside in a year. The crowd grew quiet, then the tired man from the market spoke again. My first daughter sits in darkness because she leaks, he said. My second is buried. And across the square, a younger woman raised her hand. I swallowed poisonous herbs when I was 11 because I was afraid of marriage. I survived. Others did not. The silence now was heavy. Corinne stood still and even the elders were no longer speaking about honor. Marik did not step forward to speak, he just stood beside his wife. The chief stepped onto the palace veranda. He looked at the mothers first and not the men. For the first time, his voice was not angry. He said, this fire has revealed something we have hidden. He said, we have protected tradition. But we have not protected our daughters. A murmur moved through the square. He said firmly, from today, no girl in Zamari will be married before she is 18. And no one should force a child into marriage. Any child who wants to go to school should not be stopped. A breath seemed to leave the village all at once. He added, if any man forces it, he answers to this palace. And that silence meant more than words. Months passed and Marik's barn was rebuilt, not by Marik alone but other hands that once stood at a distance when it was burning came to help too. His barn was now bigger and stronger. His business bounced back and Corinne came to apologize for the troubles he had caused. Saudi returned to school excitedly, and one morning, years later, a young woman stood in a white coat outside a small hospital at the edge of Zamari's first general hospital built by Dr. Saudi Marik. Women traveled from nearby villages, girls came to speak to her, mothers brought their daughters early. Inside the palace, a framed decree hung on the wall, child marriage was banned in Zamari. People would later say it changed because of arguments, because of fire. People would say the chief made the decision, but those who were there and those who remembered knew the truth. The village changed the day the mothers stopped whispering. It changed because one father refused to bury another daughter, and because a village finally listened. The end.